This is Steve Zeltzer with WorkWeek, and today we're going to be looking at the struggle in Argentina. There's a important working class movement, trade union movement in Argentina, and in the recent elections in Argentina, the Left and Workers United Front, which is a militant class struggle or political organization based on unions and workers' movement in Argentina, captured the largest percentage of vote of the left in the history of Argentina. It is now the third largest political force in Argentina. This development is important since Argentina now faces an attack by the IMF and world capital on the conditions and benefits that the workers have. So joining us is Guillermo Kane. First of all, I want to congratulate you, Guillermo, on your election representing Buenos Aires and the government there. And that you and many others now in your United Front, electoral United Front, have had a big leap in support. So first of all, the political situation of the working class in Argentina. Maybe you can talk about the conditions now in Argentina that led to the formation of the United Front left bloc in Argentina. What were those conditions and what the program of that United Front is?
First of all, thanks for having me again, Steve, and and thank you for the congratulations that I extend to all the comrades who participated in the campaign and who have been part of this, big effort by the Left Front. This year, it's been a decade that we founded the Left Workers Front in Argentina, first between three parties, and then 2 years ago, the Left Unity Front. First, it was the Partido Obrero, my party, Workers' Party, the PTS, Workers' Socialist Party, and Socialist Left, Izquierda Socialista. And 2 years ago, MST, another socialist workers movement who in previous years had attempted to fuse or to promote center-left fronts, though they come from Trotskyist as well as the other three parties, and decided to split with that orientation and add their strength to the left workers movement in 2019. So it's been 10 years that this has been formed, and through different situations, of course, peaks and valleys. One thing that has kept this left front together and that we consider to be a relatively specific condition of the left front in Argentina in comparison to other left fronts that we see in other parts of Latin America and the world, is that it is not a front based on class collaboration, but on working class independence. It is a front where the different parties that participate in the front and promote it are very active in the class struggle in Argentina. And of course, we have political differences. Of course, we have debates. And in particular, the PO, my organization, thinks that apart from being an electoral bloc and doing some common rallies and statements, we need this left front to become an actual united front on all fronts of the class struggle, which is not really the case, which is not fully the case, which we see as a limit. Now, this being said, through 10 years, we have acted in the political situation in our country with absolute independence from both Peronism and Kirchnerismo and the right-wing opposition, which are the two big blocs that in the last long decade, so to speak, have dominated Argentine politics and which both represent different aspects of the interests of the capitalist class.
Peronism presented itself as a representative of the workers. Perón said he was above the class struggle, but he was representing the working class, and the Peronist movement had big influence and control of the unions. What has happened in Argentina with the Peronist movement in the unions? And
first of all, what Perón actually said was that there had to be harmony between classes and that the state had to make sure that the interests both of workers and of capitalists were equally looked after. This is an important distinction. It is not a movement which talks about independence of workers or proclaims to represent specifically workers. What it says is that it represents the Argentine country, and in that representation, it says it looks equally for the interests of businessmen and workers, which of course is a fantasy, and which leads historically to losses for workers who try to be taken to the impression that a bourgeois movement can look after their interests. In the case of the last few decades, what has happened is, first under Menem, there was a Peronist government, which was, it's usually identified with what is called neoliberal governments. Then after the rebellion in 2001, Kirchnerismo gave it a center-left populist makeover, so to speak, and a very fierce policy of co-optation to the state of the different struggle movements that had developed after the rebellion in 2001 against the De la Rua government. The different social strategies that they carried out, maintaining payment of the foreign debt, maintaining millionaire subsidies to private service companies, and looking after imperialist and local bourgeois interests, were not able to prevent a very strong economic crisis from taking hold. They were defeated in 2015 by the right-wing Macri government, or who attained the presidency in 2015. And of course, the Macri government saw, which was a more direct representation of imperialism, not the sort of nationalist bourgeois movement which wants to defend the coexistence with imperialism, but negotiating on its own terms. Macri was very much a proponent of free market, no control of capital coming into investment and flight, and in a short period, racketed up the level of indebtedness of the country, allowed record capital flight from the country, and took the country to a very serious crisis. Of course, all of the reforms that he carried out and his policies he could not have done without Peronism. For example, recently we were talking about the last big upheaval here, the last probably big social upheaval to this point, which was the workers' mobilization in December 2017 against the pension reforms and an announced labor reform. Now, this was passed under the Macri government with votes and support from many of the Peronist governors and congressmen, who, as Macri had won in a midterm election and just announced all of these reforms, and they together with the trade union bureaucracy, supported them. They managed to get the pension reform voted, but the labor reform was tabled after the voting in the Congress on the pension reform turned into a clash in the streets between a mobilization of 300,000 workers. Our comrade Cesar Aracaki, who participated in the International Solidarity meeting the other day that you invited us to, and Daniel Ruiz, a militant of another left party, have been convicted last week for having participated in that demonstration, which was heavily repressed by the police, and where workers, of course, defended their right to march through the streets and make their opposition to the stealing of the pensions, known, and to try to stop Congress from voting this law. In 2019, a coalition of different Peronist and center-left forces won back the presidency and have carried out a very severe austerity program since then. To the point that they've just lost the middle elections. In just 2 years, they lost millions of votes. And the Macri right-wing forces won this parliamentary election, basically as a result of the level of poverty and inflation and just losing of the real value of salaries, and a very tough austerity, which made things very difficult during the pandemic, because the first months of the pandemic, the government seemed to be trying to limit circulation to a certain point, though a lot of companies were permitted to go on working and so on and so forth. And then they swung to a policy of opening up schools and all of the economic functioning and so forth in early 2021, and did not stop, did not change this, even when the second wave here was fully on, which has caused over 120,000 deaths. So there were less subsidies and less, just in general, measures carried out to try to stop people from having to go out to work in 2021 than in 2020. So the biggest amount of contagion and death was in 2021. And it was very clear that the reason for this was fiscal austerity. And of course, the government also did not touch the privileges of private labs and private healthcare in general, even in the height of the pandemic. It took a lot of months for vaccination here to get underway, when a private lab of a partner, of an economic and political partner of the president, which was here in Buenos Aires Province, had produced a larger amount of doses than the population of the country, 100 million doses of AstraZeneca vaccine, and just exported them out of the country without complying with a millionaire contract by the state that had bought those vaccines. So they just did not comply with it. We mobilized the Left Front to that private lab, Map Science Lab in Escobar, and said, the vaccines are here, we have to get people vaccinated. But the government did not take that decision to go over private patents, to have a state production of vaccination to get it quicker, nor did they, for example, intervene to make private clinics receive patients that aren't paying, which is another demand that we had. There were even over 10 private clinics in the province of Buenos Aires closed their doors during the height of the pandemic. Some that had whole floors equipped with respiratory treatments, for respiratory treatments and so on, because their owners just decided to put their investment elsewhere. They just closed them down. So they really, even though they present themselves as, so to speak, reformers or nationalists or whatever, the truth is that their administration was a very tough austerity administration against workers in the middle of a very serious social and economic crisis that came from the previous government, with also the impact of the pandemic. And this really showed their true colors, so to speak. So I think this is a situation. In 2019, a lot of workers that in the unions or in neighborhood organizations maybe work together with the left told us, we're voting for Alberto Fernandez against Macri, because we just can't bear this level of pauperization. I know you guys, I know your criticisms of Peronism, but it might not be great, but at least let's get these guys out of office, And the Left Front in 2019 got no congressman in, and had an electoral setback and a certain level of political isolation. A lot of workers that were close to us were telling, maybe did not trust Peronism, but thought that it was a lesser evil against Macri. And in a very brief period of time, a political experience was made by a mass of workers who broke with the Peronist government. And Peronism has had the worst election in its history since 1945. And it's important that one of the rising forces, and as you said, the third national force is the left, is a left front, is a left front that is for class struggle, is a left front that is for a workers' government, and it's a left front that is active in in the class struggle as it exists in all its demands. So we've had very high elections in one province, in Jujuy. We got 25% of the vote. It was vote by vote whether we came in second or third in that province as a whole. We were almost displaced Peronism from the second place in the province. And in the greater Buenos Aires area, which is the largest, most populous working class area of the country, we've done very high votes, which, not only got in, a larger amount of national congressmen and state or provincial legislators, but we got into the city councils in at least 7 districts. And this is very important here because local administration, together with trade unions, are the basis of a very long-standing Peronist control of the working class. So in the same way that the footholds that we have on some unions and even some industrial unions are very important to fight for a new workers' leadership, the fact that in some of the most impoverished and populous working class districts have voted 1 or 2 leftist councilmen for the first time in their history is a very symbolic blow to Peronist control of the working class in districts like La Matanza, Merlo, Moreno, or others, where our comrades were elected on Sunday.
And we're speaking with Guillermo Kane. He's a newly elected member on Buenos Aires in United Left Front, Workers United Left Front. And the role of the trade union bureaucracy here in the United States, the AFL-CIO, the unions support capitalism, they support imperialism. They work with this National Endowment for Democracy. They're taking $75 million a year for international operations. Their Solidarity Center in Argentina, they were supportive of the military coups there. The AFL-CIO sets up pro-corporate unions. These unions now in Argentina, the Peronist unions, where they control, what is the situation in those unions now with this new political situation in Argentina with that union bureaucracy?
Well, in Argentina, the unions had split up the trade union bureaucracy in these years, with the different splits in the bourgeoisie. Different sectors favored Macrismo or Kirchnerismo or the different governments. They are in a state of discredit, and they are refusing to organize a growing sector of the working class, not just unemployed workers, but also those who are outside traditional union labor contracts through different forms of labor precarization and, for example, the gig economy and so forth. And of course, they turn their back on millions of workers that are under these conditions. But even formal unionized labor has been losing working conditions and real value of their wages towards inflation all these months. The medium wage increase that the government pacted with the union bosses was about 29%, in some cases 32%, and inflation in the last 12 months is 52%. So there's been a sharp decrease in just the value of wages. There are just very few exceptions. One is the tire workers union, which is it's a national industrial union headed by the left, which through the method of general assemblies, of course, marches and strikes, has been able to get their union contracts to be above inflation. They've actually won against inflation, but that's a rare case in the current status of the labor movement in Argentina. And it does go to show what a class struggle leftist union leadership and method, of course, backed by the mobilization of the rank and file, can achieve. There is an important sector of shop stewards committees and local union offices under the control of the left, even though during the recessions, particularly under the Macri government, many companies which had leftist union representation actually closed their doors to try to destroy union organization there. But there is still a very important union organization. And just 3 weeks ago, the tire workers union voted our party comrade Alejandro Crespo as general secretary by over 70% of the national vote. And for example, our comrade Romina del Pla, who just got reelected into the National Congress, is also the general secretary of the teachers union of the populous district of La Matanza, which has over 10,000 members in that district, and is the head of the anti-bureaucratic trend within the teachers union, which is very widespread and runs many local chapters of the teachers union. So we are definitely a part of the labor movement, and not as a separate union central, but as a current within each union and union central to oust the bureaucracy and to take back the unions as tools for the workers and for our working class interests. Tomorrow, the unions and some social movements that support the government are calling for a march to Plaza de Mayo, which has a very confusing program, so to speak. It talks about the good election that the government made and to go to celebrate that when the government just lost the election. It talks about supporting the government in its negotiation with the IMF when the economic program that the government is going to send in, which is it is negotiating with IMF officers and the right-wing opposition, it can only lead to greater austerity and to a policy of labor reforms against workers. And of course, the trade union itself has been, in the last few months, facilitating local company-by-company labor contracts that are setbacks for labor conditions. For example, in the auto plant Toyota, the Japanese-owned auto plant, which is in the north area of the greater Buenos Aires region, there have been changes to increase production without increasing wages and to turn Saturdays into a regular workday from the point of view of the payment received by workers. And they had this passed in a fraudulent plebiscite with the workers, where both the president and his labor minister and the Peronist union worked together with the company to pressure workers into accepting this. So even though the right-wing opposition is more vocal in its proposals of labor reform, and the Peronist government does not publicly say we are for a new labor reform, what is going on is that they are preparing the ground and they are advancing where they can in that sense. So just to finish off, Sunday, when the elections were here and the results were coming in, the first thing President Alberto Fernandez said was, I'm sending in the first days of December this economic plan that we're discussing with the IMF. And the Left Front, and it's on YouTube, and if anyone wants to check it, without really having been able to discuss it, all of our comrades, and Gabriel Solano, one of the legislators who got elected, he was the first to say it, but everybody agreed. He said, our central committees have not met. We've obviously haven't had a chance to discuss this, but we can say that not only is the Left Front going to vote against this in Congress, but we are going to campaign in every union, neighborhood, school, workplace, university, and so on, for there to be a mass demonstration against this economic plan that is being discussed with the IMF and by the main bourgeois parties.
And we're speaking with Guillermo Kane. And Guillermo, why don't you talk about what the IMF, which is controlled by the United States, the world billionaires, the capitalist class globally, implementing privatization, austerity. Why don't you talk about what they want in Argentina and what the program of your Left United Front is for the working class of Argentina to defend itself against the severe economic crisis and the COVID crisis that you're facing?
Okay. First off, what the IMF is asking for, the IMF there's of course a part of the foreign debt that's directly with the IMF. You know that the IMF gave record loans during the Macri government, and those payments are coming up. And there's of course the debt with the private sector as well. And they want demands for austerity policies that can show that those payments will be made in the upcoming years. And this, of course, demands health, education, and other public services to be strongly cut. For example, pension, the pensions are, public pension funds are done through the contributions of workers during their active economic life. But those funds have been used systematically by the state for purposes of placing the bonds that the government puts out as debt. So that's a part of the foreign debt that's not even is not even counted, because they say that no foreign no foreign organism or private stakeholder has this, but they actually take the pensioners' funds, empty out the money, and just put in government bonds. So most pensioners the majority of pensioners are getting payments that are below the poverty line, and the current government has actually made reforms that are even more strenuous, more violent cuts than those made by Macri. And so this is a sort of pressure that is being put. And of course, as I told you a few minutes ago, there is much pressure for a labor reform. Different points here are in discussion, both over being cheaper to hire and fire workers, and just in general, more flexibilized labor. The government promoted something they called the Productivity Congress, where the union bureaucrats and the big bosses of the different industries gathered a few months ago, with big pressure being put in all that discussion for an increase in the flexibilization of labor in Argentina. So these are some of the demands. Our program starts with not recognizing foreign debt, and of course nationalizing banks and stopping capital flight, and being able to use all that richness, all the riches of our country, which are drained by imperialism every day, in a program of industrialization and of solving the very profound lack of urbanization and access to housing that we have in our country. There are millions that do not have proper housing. There are millions who live in neighborhoods which do not have access to sewage, which do not have access to drinking water. And we think that putting the riches of the country into solving all these problems is also a way to end recession and to generate jobs. And we of course think that all of these jobs have to be under labor condition, under union conditions, but also have to have a minimum wage which covers the cost of living of a family. The cost of living of a family is calculated today around 110,000 pesos, and the minimum wage is under 30,000 pesos. So the actual legal minimum wage here is below not just the poverty line, but we call it indigencia. So that's like not even having money for food. It's hunger conditions, so to speak. So basically, our program is a reorganization of society, starting with the right to work and the right and having an income which allows feeding, clothing, and giving housing to your family, to a working class family. Of course, this can only be done by a workers' government, and the Left Front is very clear on this. And we participate in all struggles of our people. We participate in the parliament and in parliamentary organisms as a way to give a space for this political denunciation of capitalism and to all immediate demands of workers and other oppressed sectors of our people. But we understand that only under a workers' government and only in alliance with workers and peasants of all our region and internationally is struggling for a united socialist Latin America, will we have conditions to defeat imperialism. This is an important point because, of course, any worker, any youth, when we say stop paying the foreign debt, which is the big structural point here, will say, okay, but what happens then? You know, this is where this is the toughest debate in the country, because this means defying U.S. imperialism, and both from the center left, from the right wing, they'll say we'll be isolated from the world. But really, this suffering under U.S. imperialism, which is endemic and prolonged in Argentine life, does not allow us to grow, does not allow us to breathe, does not allow us to develop. Our country is going backwards in industrialization over the last decades. In our country, large-scale unemployment has become a fixture, and over half of the population is below the poverty line. Over 3/4 of children are under the poverty line. So we do not think that these conditions are livable. We think a historic transformation has to take place. And of course, this is a big debate. And of course, not even probably the 1,400,000 workers who voted for us on Sunday all are fully sure about how a revolutionary transformation such as that can take place. Many probably voted us with a more partial understanding of how a transformation can take place, but definitely under the idea that something has to change. So this is the big. I think this is the big point. We need to split with the mechanism of foreign debt, which is a mechanism of oppression, domination, and impoverishment, not only, of course, in Argentina, but in all semi-colonial countries.
And another issue is the investment of China. China now is the largest exporter of capital around the world, in Africa, in Latin America, and Asia. What is the role of Chinese capital in Argentina?
Well, yeah, Chinese have been buying some important companies, private ports, oil extraction from soybeans, and in other sectors. It is. I wouldn't say they're major players yet as one of the owners of capital in the country. Though there have been different agreements, for example, a swap of yuan and pesos, and exploration of different agreements, both under the Kirchner government and under the Macri government. The two main players in Argentina and the region are both U.S. imperialism and also European imperialism, who played a major role, for example, in the privatization of public services, which began under Menem in the 90s, but which has been sustained with very large public subsidies to these companies who invest nothing and just pocket the tariffs, the increasing tariffs that they charge every year. Of course, they have some participation in different sort of enterprises.
Have they attacked the unions in these enterprises that they bought?
Well, in one case, I could give you, which is Nidera, used to be a big oil factory, and eating oil from soybeans and sunflowers and so forth, and they closed down the factory and laid off all the workers after it was bought by a Chinese company a few years ago. But at least off the top of my head, I couldn't give you any major labor conflicts under Chinese capital.
Okay. The other issue, and that is going on both in the United States and internationally, is the growth of the right wing of fascist movement. And in the United States, we may have a Trump coming back. We may have a successful coup in the United States of the right wing forces and the rise of fascism. And a large number of people voted for Trump, and numbers of those want to see a dictatorship in the United States. And what is the situation in Argentina as far as the growth of the fascists, the right-wing forces? What's their program, and is this government going to work with them around attacking workers in Argentina? And what's the danger to the working class in this rise of the fascist movement?
Well, there's definitely been a growth in an electoral growth of the far right in the last elections. This has been the first strong election of the far right in a very long time. These are groups they call themselves libertarian, and are followers of the Chicago liberal economists and so forth. Actually have very little of libertarian. They are more authoritarian than libertarian. They are proponents of repression of unemployed workers' movements. They are proponents of police assassinations of unconvicted criminals. They are proponents of attacking the right to strike and practically making workers' strikes illegal. And they are against abortion rights for women. So there's really nothing liberal about them at all. They come from the Macri movement, from Juntos para el Cambio, and have split from there, and have had a very strong media support. They've done very important elections in the city of Buenos Aires and have grown in the province of Buenos Aires as well, but do not have a national scale yet. And I wouldn't call them a full-blown fascist movement, because they do not have a massive following of thugs that can attack working class organizations. They do not have a real, at least as of yet, mobilization of petty bourgeois and lumpen elements and so forth. They're basically an electoral phenomenon and an online phenomenon. Of course, they can develop in this dangerous sense, and this is a possibility. The other possibility is that they fold back into Macrism. There's an inner struggle inside of Macrismo between a more moderate wing and a more hawkish right wing linked to Bolsonaro. These sectors went outside of Macrismo in this election, but are sympathetic towards the Bolsonaro wing of the big right-wing bourgeois coalition against the more moderate sectors. And they are even talking about a common platform for the next elections. Some youth sectors see them with sympathy, and they have done they've gotten 70% in the city of Buenos Aires, which is an important presentation, and actually for the first time that this candidate presented himself. And he's an economist, and he was the economist most featured on national television in the last 3 years. And an important media mogul is behind his candidacy. So he's been on constantly on the media and have had an impact. And as Trump does, they present themselves as rebels and critical of the system and critical of what they call the political caste.
So populists, they present themselves as populists for the people.
No, not populist. Not populist because they're liberals. They say that the state should be destroyed. This candidate said that the central bank should be burned down. Basically, so the idea would be, I guess, for a dollarized economy.
And a dollarized economy in Argentina, what would that mean?
Oh, just mass poverty. Well, actually, the situation in Argentina is that it is a dollarized economy for all intents and purposes. I mean, the peso exists only to, you get your wages in pesos and you have to purchase food in pesos, but it does not, you can't treasure it. It becomes devaluated so quickly that no one actually saves their money in pesos. So dollars are very coveted. And even though we produce food, not only for our country, but for an important part of the world population, food is sold in Argentina at dollar value. So a liter of, I don't know, sunflower oil will change its price according to the relationship between the peso and the dollar, even though it has none of its components or the wages of the workers that make them are in dollars. But when the dollar fluctuates, all our prices do as well.
So it is actually, although Argentina is a world producer of food products, you're saying there's starvation, there's hunger in Argentina.
Oh, of course, yeah.
And you've been organizing,
which is capitalism, of course. You know, we produce food for to feed 400 million people, and we have a population of about 47 or 48 million, and 2 out of every 3 children do not have the 4 meals a day in our country.
And
in the central market, which is in the greater Buenos Aires area, where vegetables and fruit and meat from all the country are coming to distribute, they throw out tons and tons of fruits and vegetables which can't be sold at the price that the businessmen want for them. And of course, they prefer to destroy or to let that food rot rather than for that to get to the soup kitchens that are set up by hungry people in every neighborhood. So yeah, that's capitalism, and that's what's going on in Argentina. You know, that's
and your reality. Party, the Workers' Party, has organized Pollo Obrero, immigrant workers. You have community meetings. These organizations. Why don't you talk a little bit about Pollo Obrero, how they block the highways, or to demand that they get food so they don't starve to death.
Yeah. The Pollo Obrero has been a huge part of this electoral campaign. It's been the vanguard of our campaign. It's had its birth 20 years ago in what was called the Piquetero movements, which is roadblocks of unemployed workers. And the government has put out different subsidies, which, you know, of course, are below the poverty line. But after the popular rebellion of 2001, to try to, to try to avoid hunger and unemployment from turning into a popular rebellion. So there's a big mass of low-income government subsidy plans, which they try to turn into out-of-union precarious labor, and there's a lot of soup kitchens, which the Pollo Obrero and other organizations operate in hundreds and hundreds of neighborhoods across the country. So for us, it is very important that the unemployed workers organize under a class struggle idea and recognize themselves as part of the working class, and instead of pressuring against wages and labor conditions as as functions naturally under capitalism as a reserve army of workers, what happens is that the unemployed workers movement is the best ally of any labor conflict, and even these government subsidies, which do not solve the problem of unemployment, do work as a sort of informal wage limit, downwards limit, so to speak, because bosses who want to pay less than the government subsidies can't get workers. So this is our situation. The Polo Obrero has been growing, particularly at a huge pace, and it is the main component of a rally that we had of 30,000 workers in support of our campaign a few weeks ago in Plaza de Mayo, in the main plaza of the country, and of a very swiftly growing neighborhood organization. Part of that growth, of course, workers who have been laid off, who have lost their houses and are fighting for housing, join our ranks. Also, workers who split with social organizations or unemployed workers organizations that have become part of the government, because some organizations who some years ago struggled side by side with us and who, for example, were under Maoist or Chavista leaderships have become part of the government in the last few years. And they've become part of the welfare ministry. So their leaders want to have political careers as part of the Peronist front, and are telling them to not mobilize, to not fight for housing, to not fight because they don't have employment, to not demand even the food that the government isn't providing. And so what thousands of them are coming over to the Polo Obrero in the last few months. We've had over 7,000 workers who were in the state-run social movements who have decided to join the Polo Obrero. And this is making the Peronist bosses and state officials very nervous. They've been attacking our organization publicly and not complying with the agreements to send foods to the food kitchen, and threatening to cut off government subsidies to those who are members of the Polo Obrero. So this is also, I think, part of the class struggle that lies ahead. Of course, in the unions, the unrest because of the wage, the inflation that is eating away very rapidly at wages, and this push for labor reform, and together with that, this struggle with the unemployed workers, which are frankly the most active sector of the working class right now. I mean, if you look at the huge demonstrations and roadblocks that the Polo Obrero and other organizations who have a united front have been carrying out against the government, it is by far the largest opposition demonstration that there has been in the last few years, both against Macri and Alberto Fernandez.
And the issue of a united front perspective of your left unity front, your left front unity, the idea of a united front for a left bloc. Why don't you talk about that perspective and its relevance possibly to the United States and other countries around the world in organizing the working class and fighting back against capitalism and imperialism?
Yeah. Well, of course, we want to suppress the competition between the left as a main goal. Doesn't mean we have the same position. We have polemics in our newspaper and between militants, and militants can join one party or another, and different groupings, of course, form and whatever. But in terms of an electoral campaign, in terms of a public effort of agitation towards millions of workers, we do not think that this difference between leftist groups is the main point that has to be stressed, in as much as these groups are all within, in terms of working class positions and independent of the bourgeois party. So the left front has allowed putting our energy into marking the contradiction between the parties that defend the bourgeois interests and those that defend working class interests. This has been the center of this decade of political work, which has made us the third force in the country. In the trade unions, in the student movement, in the unemployed workers movement, the PO promotes the broadest possible united front for concrete demands and for recuperating unions and student centers as organizations for struggle. There is often the possibility for different groups that are anti-bureaucratic, that are leftist, and that support workers' interests to put together common platforms, common ballots, or to call for plans of struggle and mobilization together. And when possible, we make this into a permanent reality. As in the unemployed movement, we have something called the Unidad Piquetera, where the Polo Obrero is banded together with all groups who are independent of the government. And there's something called the Plenario del Sindicalismo Combativo, where we also group all anti-bureaucratic unions. And in some form or another, in the women's movement, in the gender diversity movement, in environmental struggles, we tend to organize a bloc of around class independence with all sectors which that can be done. We think that this needs to be taken to a new level, and we think that the election results of Sunday definitely show that a new level has to be taken, where we think a Congress of workers with nationwide local assemblies of all sectors of the working class that are that agree to reject the agreement with the IMF, payment of foreign debt, and to struggle together for common platforms of demands could be a huge way of developing a wider base for the politics of the left front. This is our proposal to the other members of the left front. We have a debate on this, but our party's proposal, the PO's proposal, is that there has to be a National Congress of Workers, and that this vote of over 1 million could, a good way of organizing not just the militants of each party who can grow and recruit new members, but also a wider array of different organizations and groups and currents that can identify broadly with the left front and with which we can vote a plan of action which can put thousands of the street against this new deal with the IMF, which will be have very severe consequences for all the working class and the people of Argentina.
And last, the struggle of the Argentine workers, of course, is connected to the struggle of the American workers, the struggle of workers all over the world who face attacks, similar attacks on public services, privatization, increasing repression. How do you see the formation of an international working class movement and unification of workers globally so they can fight as one against the attack of capital on a global level?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the situation in Argentina is not a different one from what we are seeing globally. There have actually been a wave of popular rebellions, in particular in Latin America, but also we have seen in the United States under the concrete form of facing up police repression, particularly against the African American and Latin American sectors, but in general, and a new strike wave underway today. We have seen the mobilizations and demonstrations and struggles in France. We have seen the different waves of rebellions in the Near East and in other regions, in the Middle East and other regions. We think that the only way we can advance is through internationalist solidarity and unity of the working class and oppressed peoples everywhere to defeat imperialism. And of course, we are lacking something that revolutionaries in other generations have had, which is an international leadership. And this is a very serious defect of our struggle, which makes important, very important struggles in all our countries lack a common international horizon, because the betrayals of Stalinism and social democracy have soiled this, and defeats have destroyed an organized international labor movement that considers itself socialist. As such, doesn't exist, or there are very small groups that cannot be recognized as such yet. So we definitely think we have to rebuild a labor movement with class consciousness and with a revolutionary program internationally. We have to refound the Workers' International, which is the Fourth International, because the Trotsky and the Fourth International expressed a program of criticism of the bureaucracy, which turned workers' state towards the path of capitalist restoration, and that is a historical balance sheet which is necessary to understand what's going on in Cuba, in China, and to understand what happened with the revolutions of the 20th century. So that's the international today. It has to be, the Fourth International has to have this experience, and we have to refound an international center of workers. Last year, we had a conference of over 40 organizations of Latin America and the US, called by the FITU of Argentina. This was a step in the direction of revolutionaries meeting, discussing the situation, and trying to advance in some common activity. We think a new conference should be called for, and we think other initiatives in the sense of international regroupment have to be organized, because the capitalist crisis and the tendency to new popular rebellions demand forging a leadership which can take this to victory. There is no chance for workers to be able to destroy capitalism and rebuild a socialist society without a revolutionary internationalist leadership. So this is definitely one of the urgent tasks of our time.
Okay, well, I want to thank you very much for joining us. We've been talking with Guillermo Kane. He is a newly elected member of the Buenos Aires Regional Parliament, and is part of a Left Front-Unity, Workers United Front, that is received over 1 million votes and is now the third largest political force in Argentina. So thanks for joining us on WorkWeek.
Thank you, Steve, and a salute to all the comrades who are organizing and struggling in the United States and elsewhere that can watch us through your program. Thanks.